We're taking off. Go to the beach camping right after class. Yeah. Yeah. All right. You should do something fun. All right. All right, guys. We're gonna go and get started. Betsy's here, in case you didn't know. Hey, Betsy. She's like, "What are you talking about, Dad?" Yeah. So I just thought it'd be fun to bring her. She's just cruising around. So feel free to pet her. Say hi. All right. Who's got beach plans today? Anybody go on the beach? Beach plans? Yeah, got a few. It's like warmer than it ever gets in the summer here, so you might as well. We're heading up to. We're gonna go beach camping this weekend after class, so it'll be fun. All right, guys, ready? Ready to start? Betsy's ready. Yeah, you can. You can. All right, guys, let's go ahead and get started here. You guys all talking about the beach? Is that what it is? All right. Should I do the 1, 2, 3 eyes on me thing? 1, 2, 3 eyes on me. Or like the clap if you hear me. Sit down and clap twice if you hear me. There it is. Oh, that one worked. Kindergarten. The kindergarten move worked. All right. Okay. All right. Well, this is what next week looks like. We just got 2 days and Easter break, obviously, on Thursday and Friday, no class. So no lab to worry about next week, but Master and AP due on Monday and then exam number 5 on Wednesday. Okay. Remember that we have that review session on Monday night instead of Wednesday night, if you go to those. And yeah, that's it. So questions about next week at all? No. Does it say that? Oh, yeah. That's saying Master and AP is done online. Yeah. But Monday's class is not online. Yeah. Yeah. Monday will be in person. But yeah. And then make sure you do the quiz tonight if you haven't done that yet. That is, and there was about 12 of you that had already taken it. There was one question on there that snuck in there from a chapter or a section you didn't have to study about hernias. So if you had already taken it and gotten that one wrong, then I gave you the points back. If you hadn't taken it yet, then I changed that question. So yeah, made it a much harder one. Just kidding. I'm joking. But okay. Yeah. So any questions about next week or what we're doing? Okay. All right. Little family update. Eve. Oh, here we go. Hold on. Eve broke her ankle, maybe. Maybe just fractured. We're not totally sure yet, but she's about the cutest thing on crutches you've ever seen. So she's crutching around. Betsy's making herself at home back there. Yeah, nice. Yeah, she's crutching around like the doctor like didn't even want to give us crutches. She was just like, yeah, 5-year-olds usually can't do crutches. And we're like, let's give it a try. And Eve's not going to let somebody tell her what she can and can't do. So she's been crutching around like crazy. But yeah, but we're a little concerned about camping with her this weekend on crutches. We'll see how that goes. We're going camping at the beach. So yeah, see how that goes, but it'll be fun. So for those of you that are in my wife's class, it's her birthday next Tuesday. That's why we're camping this weekend. So yeah, but that's Evie girl. We'll go to orthopedics on Monday and see if it is a growth plate fracture or just a sprain. So hopefully we'll find out more. But yeah. All right. Yeah. So today, sorry, let me fix that real quick. Today we're transitioning out of the digestive system into the urinary system. So today will be mostly structures / anatomy of the urinary system. And then on next week on Monday, we'll get into more of the physiology of that. But today's class is the last one that's on this set of notes, or sorry, on this exam, right? And then what we cover on Monday will be new material for the final. So there's like maybe 4 or 5 days of class that are new material on the final. Okay. All right. Okay, so we'll talk a bit about the kidneys first, as we'll spend most of our time today. The kidneys are definitely some amazing little organs. Their main job is to filter blood. Okay, and so how much blood do they filter per day? Well, they actually pull about 50 gallons of blood, 50 gallons of fluid out of our blood every day. Okay, but about 400 gallons of blood actually goes through the vessels in the kidneys, and then of that 450 gallons actually gets pulled out, filtered. Okay, so when we think of our full blood volume, we have about 6 liters of blood, and so how often does it go through the kidneys? About 12 times per hour, our full blood volume goes through the kidneys. Okay, so just incredible little blood filters, lots and lots of blood flow. You guys saw the renal artery, right, which is delivering blood to the kidneys. So big, thick artery, large diameter, short distance, so very low resistance there. Lots and lots of little tubes in the kidneys. Okay, if you took every little tube inside the kidneys, laid it out in a single file line, we'd have about 140 miles of tubes in between our kidneys. Okay, and one of the amazing things about the kidneys is that when they start declining in function, we don't even know. Okay, we don't even know until they're at about until they have lost about it. So when they have only about 20% of their function left, that's when we actually start seeing symptoms from kidney failure. But they can be only half working, and we don't even notice it. Doesn't even produce any symptoms. Yeah.
Like long-term effects, like say who only at 50% function,
yeah, there could be for sure, but this is why people can't donate a kidney. And it's like you could live a perfectly normal life with one kidney. But yeah, maybe under situations of like greater types of stress, like physiological stress, like with lots of exercise or lots of dehydration or certain types of intakes of certain chemicals, drugs, and different things that your kidneys need to help you deal with, then somebody with 50% of kidney function might feel that a little bit more. But just under totally normal circumstances, living with one kidney is a totally doable thing. It doesn't really have any consequences. Yeah, until that kidney starts declining, right? Then you have less kind of flexibility in that. So yeah, it's a good question. Okay, questions on that at all? Any other questions? Go ahead, Trevor.
Is there any advantage to that? Like to them being able to sustain a lot of, or like to not function well without producing symptoms?
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of like a built-in cushion in the system, right? It's like when our kidneys do start declining, because most of our kidneys will start declining with aging, that we have a lot of room to deal with that and not really have it affect us. So that's probably the most beneficial thing, is just kind of that cushion in their ability. But then under situations of greater stress with lower blood volume or different things, then there's some room for them to kind of flex up and do some extra work, and so there's that side of it too. Yeah, so good questions. Okay, so general functions of the kidneys: maintenance of fluid levels in the blood and the interstitial space. Okay, so maintaining blood pressure is a key function of the kidneys. Okay, as well as correct osmotic slash hydrostatic pressure in the blood and the interstitial space. Okay, we'll see an area of the kidneys that is a monitoring system for blood pressure and a monitoring system for osmolarity of the blood that is there, just constantly monitoring our blood pressure, constantly monitoring the level of electrolytes in our blood, and then making adjustments based on that. Okay, so that's all part of the maintenance of ion levels as well. Okay, main ions that we'll talk about: sodium, potassium, calcium, chloride. Okay, the kidneys definitely play a role in acid-base balance, but more so on the long-term side, because the kidneys can both excrete, which we would call, we're going to call that secrete when we get to talking about the function of the kidneys. That's like getting rid of it, and then reabsorb will be pulling things back into the body. It can do that for both bicarbonate, which would be the buffer side of things, the base side of things. And it can do that for hydrogen ions as well. So they can go either direction with both of those and help us maintain our acid-base balance. Hormones produced by the kidneys. Anybody remember any? What would be the name of one? Okay, renin. Yeah. And one more having to do with our red blood cells. Yeah, EPO, right? Erythropoietin, right? Yeah. So those are the two big ones there. Good job. Okay, also kidneys are extremely crucial for getting rid of waste products. Okay, so ammonia, which is NH3, is the product of when we break down things that have nitrogen in them. So including proteins and nucleic acids, right? So nitrogen is base products. We break down this stuff all the time in our body, and we need to get rid of a certain amount of nitrogen. And so it gets converted into urea eventually, right? So proteins and nucleic acids are the nitrogen containing products that we break down. So we've got these nitrogen as waste products that gets turned into urea, which is where urine gets its name, right? And that's part of what we urinate out. Okay. Questions on those general functions at all? Okay. All right. So the overview of kind of the different parts to it, right? So we've already talked about the kidneys. They're located in a cavity of the body called the retroperitoneal cavity, which just means like the back of the abdomen, pretty much. They're kind of at the very bottom of our ribs and just a little bit sticking out. Okay, so they're kind of in line with the vertebrae T11 and L2. Okay, somewhere in that area. So they're protected by the lower ribs, and obviously their function, just one, if we're going to say one function, is to produce urine. Okay. Kidneys are then connected to ureters. You guys saw those in the cats, right? So their function is to transport urine from the kidneys to the bladder, right? So just little tubes connecting the kidneys to the bladder. So you got one on each side, one from each kidney, right? And then there's the bladder, more specifically the urinary bladder. This is just urine storage, right? No modification happens here. We're just filling this up, storing it, ready for eventual urination. Okay, and then the urethra is the connection between the bladder and the outside world. All right, so bladder to the outside of the body. Okay, so that's kind of the gross anatomy of the urinary system. We'll get into the microanatomy in a second too, getting into the kidneys. But take a second here and label those images on the image on the next slide and answer that question on your clickers there. Yeah, I was just waiting until everybody wrote that down. Anna?
Question, but I only have this.
Yeah, there's a group of people that happened to with the print shop one, but then others that didn't. So you probably want to go back to the print shop and let them know, and they can print the rest of it because you bought yours from the print shop. Yeah, there's like a group of them that got messed up.
Yeah, I was like.
Yours is the same way?
I thought maybe we're gonna be like one and then like the rest of the time.
Yeah,
No.
I thought it was, yeah, I thought yours is fine. Yeah, so it's like only a few. So yeah, you probably just want to go back to the print shop and show them what you have, and they can give you the rest of it.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Going on a walk, Betsy? Going on a walk? Yeah.
And they have to put like a stent in, like an artificial one, or
Yeah, I've never heard of that procedure exactly, but yeah, that would definitely be the case. You'd have to somehow open it up or just maybe cut out a piece of it and reconnect or something. But yeah, gotta make that connection somehow for sure. Yeah.
like kidney stones, like they put like a stent through the urine, that's how they did mine.
Yeah.
But then I don't know how to that back in the area.
Oh, no.
My kidneys like injecting medicine.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, so they're like, I'm not doing it, they're like, you know, like it's like causing issues with my kidney now. So I was curious, like, what
Yeah.
to do and everything, like, what I thought practicing now.
Yeah. I don't know a lot about it clinically, but yeah.
Maybe now.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so send in that answer on your clickers. All right, make sure you hit the send button. All right, anybody else? That's why you guys are finished and sending that in. A couple people told me that their notes end early, the ones they bought from the print shop. And so if your notes don't go all the way to the last set of notes is like cardiovascular disease and diabetes. If you don't have that packet, then you might have got shorted from the print shop. So if that's the case, you probably just got to go back to the print shop and show them, and I'm sure they'll print up the rest of it for you. But yeah, that's it. You did, okay. They what? Yeah, they didn't charge you for it. Okay, cool, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, so some came out that way, others had the full thing. I'm not sure what happened there. If you got diabetes at the end there, then you're fine. Yeah, you're good to go if you got diabetes. Yeah, okay. All right, okay. All right, so the vast majority of you are saying F, right? Pretty easy question there. And that is, what's the name of that structure in F? Urinary bladder, good, okay. What's A? Adrenal gland, also known as the suprarenal gland, right? Just means on top of the kidneys, right? So that's what that is, okay? And then what's B? Yeah, the aorta, right? The abdominal aorta. Okay, and then we got C, what's C? We just finished talking about that one earlier. Rectum, yeah, okay. And then we got D there, what's D? A lot of little things packed in right there, right? What, Danica, what'd you say? Yeah, uterus, right? So only in females, obviously, okay. And then E, obviously the kidneys, okay. F, the bladder, and G would be the urethra. Okay. One thing just to note, the kidneys do stick down just a little bit below the ribs, right? So there's that little tip of the kidneys that is not protected by the ribs, and the right side is a little bit lower than the left side. So if you're like an MMA fan or a boxing fan or something, when they're reaching around the back and trying to hit them up like that, they're literally trying to hit their kidneys, right? Because if you can damage someone's kidneys, they're not going to keep fighting. So yeah, that's what they're trying to do. Yeah, but pretty painful. So, okay, any question about these structures here? All right. Okay, so a little bit more about the kidneys themselves. Okay, so the outside of the kidneys are covered by a capsule. Okay, so this is fibrous connective tissue. Its function is just to protect the kidneys, right? So give it some toughness around it, help it maintain its shape. Okay, then we also have colored in green here. It's not typically green, but that just makes it stand out, is the renal fat pad. Okay, so that's the kidneys are covered in fat or around fat. You guys saw that in the cats most likely too, right? And if some of you tried to get really neat and take all of the fat out, then the kidneys just kind of fell out, right? Did that happen to anybody? They just kind of flop around like crazy. Then yeah, they don't really get held in well anymore after that fat's gone. But that's obviously there to protect as well. But then when we get to the kidneys themselves, the renal cortex is the outside part, so the peripheral part. Okay. Within that, there's these renal columns that project medially towards the center. Okay. And then the renal medulla is the inner part of it. Okay. Little cone-shaped sections, a little bit darker in color. And these are also projecting medially towards the center via these little bumps that are called papillae. Okay, and then in the very center, there's a cavity inside the kidneys where all the urine collects, and that's known as the renal sinus. Okay. All right, so then a little bit further in there, inside of that renal sinus, that cavity is the actual part where the urine collects, which is called the renal pelvis. Okay, so it's just like a channel within the renal sinus. Its function is to create a passageway for urine produced in the kidneys. So that's eventually what's going to connect to the ureters. Right, so it connects to the ureters. Okay, and when we look in the structures of the kidneys themselves, before we get down to the renal pelvis, it's broken up into calyces. Okay, so there's major calyces, which kind of think of those like funnels. They're kind of triangular or pyramid shaped. There's two or three of those large ones. And then each of those large ones are made up of a bunch of minor calyces. And those are just like little smaller funnels inside of those. All of that's funneling urine down towards the renal pelvis, so then it can all collect into the, eventually into the ureter. Okay, so this is all urine collection down into the renal pelvis. Go ahead.
This is kind of like to make more times, like if there's just like one big one, like if it just go really fast? Or is that just to, like make it slower?
And not necessarily make it slower. You'll see once we get to the microanatomy, there's just a bunch of these little structures packed into these little regions. And the little structures, little functional unit of the kidney is called the nephron, which we'll talk about today. And so this is just kind of where all the nephrons are housed in these little pyramids. And it makes sense that they're kind of pyramid in shape because all the urine needs to kind of end up in the same place. So they're kind of wide at the top so we can put more nephrons in there, but then it all has to kind of collect into the same spot. So it gets narrower as it goes down. It's kind of the function of that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And then the hilum is the little indentation in the kidneys, right? If you think of the shape of a kidney bean, the one side of it is kind of indented, right? And kind of the same thing in the kidneys, right? And this is where the renal artery and renal nerves and renal vein all poke into, as well as the ureter. This is kind of the entry and exit point of the kidneys. Okay, so take a second and label these things as well. And you can answer that question there on your clickers. Go ahead. Hilum, yeah. Mhm.
That's the entry and exit point.
Pretty much because that's where anything is going to come into or out of the kidneys, it happens in the little
Okay,
indentation
now I'm
part.
confused. Like you said, it was kind of like pyramid shape, so it's like this, right?
These are the pyramid shaped things. Yeah, this and this, but the hilum is right here.
Okay.
So this is where the blood comes in, where the blood comes out. This is where the urine comes
And
out.
what are these called again? These are the.
Those are the calyces. So the major calyces and the minor calyces. Yeah.
I guess I'm confused because like, where does the urine part come in from this? Like.
Yeah, so blood comes in the artery, right? It gets filtered through these guys, and then it leaks through these and dumps into here.
Oh, so it
and then
kind of like
dumps
goes around and then goes in here and back out.
Yeah,
This.
exactly.
Oh,
Yeah,
Okay.
good.
Oh, also, just a question for you.
Yeah.
Is the rest of the packet also on PDF in the Canvas course?
It is, yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that's what I'm using.
Okay. All right. All right, guys, go ahead and send in your answer there on the clickers. Which part would be called the renal pelvis? Just looking at me. What are we doing? All right, anybody else? Everybody hit send? Okay. All right, so most of you are saying F, about another third of you are saying H. So let's walk through this here. Okay, so A is just looking from the outside. We see that little indented part, the renal hilum. Okay, that's where all the blood vessels come in and out, as well as where the ureter comes out. Okay, and then we start on the very outside part, B. What do we call that? Cortex, yeah, exactly. And just like the adrenal gland, which sits right on top of these, there's a cortex and a medulla of that too, right? So same idea, cortex is always on the outside, medulla is always on the inside, okay? And then that next part, C, what's that? That's the medulla, okay? And then we start kind of the collection part of it, the open part of it where the urine dumps into. And so we have a major calyx right here, okay? E is one of those little papilla of these the pyramid structures where we pack in the nephrons, which we'll look at in a second. Okay, but then we have F, which is the largest collection point, right? So that's where the pelvis is, right? The renal pelvis, all of those major calyces, and which we'll see in G, the minor calyces all dump into those. All right, so the calyces and the pelvis are just like open areas inside there. They're not really like special structures. They're just open for the urine to come in. But in the medulla, in those papillae, that's where all the functional units are of the kidneys, which we'll look at in a second. Okay, H is obviously the ureter. Okay, and then I is that renal pyramid in the medulla. Okay, and then we see J, renal columns, right? So they're kind of shaped differently, kind of more column shaped, straight down through the cortex. And then on the very outside, the tough fibrous structure to help protect the kidneys is the fibrous capsule. Yeah, and then just make sure you're kind of keeping track of this. So urine production up here. So it starts up there in the cortex. It's going to move its way down to the medulla, minor calyx, major calyx, pelvis, and then ureter. That's just kind of the pathway of urine as it gets produced and as it gets exits out of the kidneys. Okay. Questions on that? All right. Okay, so a little bit about the blood flow of the kidneys. The blood flow is the most crucial aspect of the function of the kidneys because that's what it does. That's what the kidneys do, is filter our blood. So blood enters the kidneys via the renal artery. This is that direct branch off of the abdominal aorta, right? So lots and lots of blood pressure and flow in the aorta right there. And then this big, thick, but short, so short in length, but large diameter, that results in very low resistance to blood flow in this renal artery, right? So we're just dumping a bunch of blood into the kidneys all the time, okay? At rest, it's about 1 liter per minute. About 20% of our cardiac output goes to our kidneys every minute at rest, okay? But as we start exercising, this can decrease drastically, right? As we start shunting blood to our muscles and less of it to other places that aren't being used at that time, okay? But the kidneys are only about 0.37% of our body weight, but they get 20% of the blood flow, right? So they get a lot of blood for the size that they are, okay? So special little capillary structure inside of our kidneys are called glomerulus, okay? And that's why I have it spelled out like that. So glom-air-lus, okay? Glomerulus, that's how you say it, right? Have any of you heard of the term GFR? How many of your grandmas or grandpas talking about their GFR? No, nothing like that. Maybe some of you that are working as EMTs or anything like that. So GFR is called glomerular filtration rate. We'll talk more about it, but it's a measurement of kidney function, okay? And it's referring to these little capillary beds, okay? So these are very leaky capillary beds. And so all that blood that came in the renal artery is eventually making its way into a glomerulus. And then that glomerulus is where all of the filtration happens. Right, so that 50 gallons of fluid that gets pulled out of the blood in our kidneys per day, all of this is happening by the glomerulus, right? This is a very leaky capillary bed that lets fluid come out. Okay, but before each glomerulus, we have arterioles before and after, right? So the one that leads to the glomerulus is the afferent arteriole, and then the one that lets blood exit the glomerulus and go back to the bloodstream is the efferent arteriole. And then we have a couple other special capillary beds in the kidneys too. One of those is called the vasorecta. This is going to be a special loop capillary system that is right next to the longer nephrons, which we'll see those in a second. And then we have another special set of capillary beds called the paratubular capillaries, and those are along the smaller nephrons, which we'll see those in a second too. So the job of those is to return things back to the blood, okay? The glomerulus is what's dumping all the fluid into the kidneys and into, to start creating urine. But then we need something to pull most of that fluid back, because there's no way that we lose 50 gallons of fluids a day, right? So 50 gallons of fluid is taken out of our blood, but almost all of that, except a very, very small percentage, is brought back to our blood. So it's brought back via these little capillary beds that surround the rest of the nephron. Okay, and then the renal vein is what returns all of this blood back to the general circulation after it's been filtered through the kidneys. Okay, and we can kind of walk through this one together here. So this is walking us through the whole pathway of blood flow in the kidneys, right? So the aorta would be right over here, right? And it connects to the renal artery right there, right? So we've got the renal artery, okay? A renal artery is going to eventually make its way, up here and all these little spots to go into a bunch of different nephrons. And then in each of those nephrons we have an afferent arteriole first, right? So that's the one leading to the glomerulus. Okay, the little curvy capillary structure in the middle there that's surrounded by this little capsule. That's the glomerulus. Okay, in that glomerulus is where all of the fluid comes out, right? So all that fluid gets filtered out, pushed into the tubular system, bless you, and then we'll talk about that tubular system here in a second, okay? So that's the afferent arteriole leading to the glomerulus, and then secondly, we have the efferent arteriole that takes the rest of the blood that didn't get pulled out and is going to go back into the other parts of the tubular system right next to it, which would include the paratubular capillaries, which kind of wrap around everything here. Or in the case of the longer nephrons, which we don't have in this image, it's something called the vasa recta, which we'll see in a different image. And then eventually that all those capillaries are going to collect back together into the venous system. And finally, that will connect to the renal vein. And then that renal vein can make its way back to the vena cava, the inferior vena cava, and get back into the general circulation. That's what 20% of our blood is doing most of the time, right? It's going through that. Okay. All right, everybody got those? Okay, so this is just kind of an expanded view looking at these structures called nephrons. Okay, and like I said, there's two different types, right? So we see this type up here, which is like smaller up higher, and then we see this other type right here. Okay, 85% of our nephrons are the ones that we call cortical. Okay, they're called cortical because they're mostly in the cortex of the kidneys. Okay, and this whole part right here is the cortex. All right, and then everything down here is the medulla. All right, so we're pretty much zooming into, oops, sorry. We're pretty much zoomed into a spot kind of like right here, kind of where we can see the junction of the cortex and the medulla at a microscopic level. This is what we have all throughout. And so this little spot right here is the junction between the cortex and the medulla. Okay, so we have cortical nephrons, the ones that are up there in the cortex, and then we have these other ones called juxtamedullary nephrons. Okay, and that just pretty much means that they're next to the medulla. Right? Juxta means next to, and the medulla is the inner part. So these are the ones next to the nephron. Okay, so the differences between the two types are the length for sure. Right, so the cortical nephrons are much shorter. You see this loop part doesn't stick down into the medulla as far as it does with the juxtamedullary ones. It sticks way down deep into the medulla. Okay, the glomerulus is much closer to the junction in the juxtaglomerular ones. And then the one key thing we find is that we only see this vasa recta capillary bed in the juxtamedullary ones. See, there's no capillary bed around the loop in the cortical ones. And that has a lot to do with their function. And we'll talk a lot more about the function of those two nephrons next time. But that loop, which we call the loop of Henle, is going to be the key feature to the function of those long ones. And we need capillaries around it to help it do its job. All right, questions so far on all these little structures? Okay, all right. Okay, so let's dive into the structure of the little nephrons themselves then. Again, so these are the functional units of the kidney. We already talked about one part, which is the glomerulus, and we talked about those capillary beds. Okay, functions here, this is where the filtration happens. This is where we concentrate down our urine so we don't lose too much fluid. And this is the site of exchange between blood and urine, right? So if there's certain things in our blood that we want to get rid of via the kidneys, this is where it's going to happen. It's going to happen in the nephron, okay? How many of these guys do we have? About 2.6, 2.5 million between our two kidneys, okay? Those little tiny units with all those little tubes and the glomerulus, we have about, 2.5 or so million of those across the two kidneys, okay? So when we're talking about these structures, this isn't talking about like blood vessels. This is talking about a tubular system, which will eventually connect down to the ureter and our urethra and the bladder and all of that, right? So it's like little tubes where urine, or what we call filtrate before it gets down into the bladder, is formed and passes through. Okay, so the first part is called Bowman's capsule, also known as the glomerular capsule. This is the little part that surrounds the glomerulus and picks up all the fluid that gets filtered out of the blood. Okay, so this is the very start of urine production. Okay, the first part we get to after that's called the proximal tubule, also known as the proximal convoluted tubule. So you'll see PCT sometimes, proximal convoluted tubule, because of that. Okay, its main function is this is where we bring back all the stuff that we didn't want to lose in the first place. Okay, so a lot of stuff that gets filtered when our whole blood gets filtered, a lot of stuff we don't want to lose went with that, right? So we need to pull all of that back. That process is called reabsorption. Okay, and so this is where the majority of reabsorption happens. Things like glucose, amino acids, things that are valuable nutrients to us that we don't want to lose, but they went over there, they went into the urine initially, but we need to pull it back right away because we don't want to lose those things. Okay, next we get to that loop of Henle. So that's that part that goes down and comes back up. There's two different portions. There's the ascending portion and the descending portion. And the function of those two sides of it are very different. But what it does, it kind of helps us temporarily concentrate the filtrate. So make it so we pull some water out to make it higher concentration of solute. And that's just kind of a temporary thing. And the reason we're going to do that is because this is temporarily setting up a concentration gradient for us in the space around that loop. And again, we'll talk about that more on Monday when we get into the formation of urine. But setting up that strong concentration gradient is going to be a key factor in how we produce urine and get all the stuff in the urine that we want to, but we don't lose too much fluid in the process. Okay, so we made it to the loop of Henle so far. Like everybody's mostly done writing down. Okay, so the next part of the nephron is called the distal convoluted tubule. So this could be the DCT, okay, distal convoluted tubule. This is this is further away from the capsule, right? So this is kind of, think of this as the fine tuning part. Okay, so the fine tuning part where varied levels of secretion and reabsorption. So if we need to get rid of some extra hydrogen ions because our blood is has a little bit too low of a pH, then this would be the place to do that. Okay, it's kind of the fine tuning part of the urine. Okay, we have a special little structure that kind of spans a gap between the blood part of it and the urine part of it. And this is known as the JGA, or the juxtaglomerular apparatus. Okay, again, juxta means next to, right? So this is something that's right next to that glomerulus. And this is a very important region that contains Bowman's capsule, distal tubule, and both of the arterioles. Okay, there's two important parts of this. The granular cells, these contain mechanoreceptors that are constantly measuring our blood pressure. Okay, we already talked about the kidneys releasing renin. This is how they do it, because they have these special little granular cells that are sensing how hard the blood's pushing on them, and they're going to release renin in response to that blood pressure. Okay, and then secondly, we have the macula densa cells, which are found in the walls of the distal tubule. Okay, and these are constantly measuring filtrate solute concentration. So these are chemoreceptors. Okay, they have chemoreceptors on these cells. And so right here in this little JGA, juxtaglomerular apparatus, we have a monitoring system for both blood pressure and solute concentration of our fluid. Okay, and then lastly, the very last part of the nephron after the distal tubule is we connect to the collecting duct, and the collecting duct is shared by multiple nephrons. So it's a large tube and a bunch of nephrons connect into it. This is where urine collection happens. This is the site of final and permanent concentration of the urine. This is where we pull back as much water as we can to make the urine very concentrated so we don't lose too much fluid. Okay. All right, next slide does some labeling of that. So go ahead and hop over to that, label those structures, and answer that question on your clickers. A lot of little structures, right? Thought she might be over there. Didn't know where she was. I thought she was over there. She likes it, the sun. Little down dog. Up dog, there it is. Down dog, up dog there. They know how to do it. Yeah. Just means close, yeah. All right, so send in your answer to that question there, which is the major site of reabsorption. I didn't give you F as an option, so it's probably not F. Oh, I guess I did. I left it a short answer, so it is, yeah, but it's not F. All right, I think that's almost everybody there. Make sure you hit the send button. Okay, so we're about 2/3 of you saying C, and then about 1/3 of you saying B. Okay, so let's just go through here. So A, what do we call A? Bowman's capsule, okay, or the glomerular capsule, same thing. Okay, the capillary beds inside of that, what's that called? I want everybody to say it. Glomerulus, yeah. Put air right in the middle of that, yeah. Glomerulus, yeah. There it is. Okay, that's the glomerulus. All right, and then the first part of the tubular system after Bowman's capsule, C is what? Proximal tubule, okay. And then we get to the loop part, right? So the loop of Henle, we have the descending loop and the ascending loop, or the descending limb and the ascending limb. Okay, and then we get to the distal convoluted tubule, right? That's E. Okay, and then what's F? What do we call that? Collecting duct, right? And you can see how multiple nephrons connect to the same collecting duct. It's not just one. Okay, and just make sure you know that this is not really how they're laid out. This image is laid out that way to make the actual proximal one more proximal and the distal one more distal. But if you go to this slide, we'll come back and answer that question. If you go to this slide, this is actually how it is, right? So the distal tubule is actually right next to the glomerulus, right? You see the difference there between those two images? Yeah. Right, so if we look at this, it has the distal tubule way over here, but this is actually flipped around over here in actuality. And the reason that's important is because that whole juxtaglomerular apparatus wouldn't make sense with this kind of layout, right? Because the distal tubule is right next to the glomerulus, where we have those monitoring systems in the afferent and efferent arterioles and the distal convoluted tubule. Lisa?
Is nephron just like a different name for loop?
Yes, different name for loop of Henle, just like Bowman's capsule or glomerular capsule. Same names for different names for the same thing. Yeah. Okay, so where's the major site of reabsorption? Most of you said C. Which one was C again? Yeah, proximal convoluted tubule. That is correct. We'll look at some percentages on Monday, but it's about 2/3 of the filtrate comes back here. Okay, other questions on these structures so far? Okay, well, I want you to spend a minute with this slide. and just kind of get your orientation. Realize that you're zoomed in on this little spot right here, okay? We have the structures labeled as far as what they're called, but once you fill in which one measures blood pressure, which one measures salt or monitor solute concentration, and then this part right here is the one I want you to answer on your clickers. I'll make it a number question. Okay, go ahead and figure that out with the people on your team and talk about that for a sec.
So everything is
So E for the first one, A for the second one.
granular cells. Wait, didn't we learn about granular cells?
All right, so you're putting a number in your clickers and then hitting send.
Well, let's see.
All right, a couple more people. Make sure you hit the send button. All right. Okay, so the vast majority of you are saying 4 for that. So the distal tubule, which is correct. Okay, so that is the distal tubule right there. Okay, and that's where the macula densa are. So which part monitors blood pressure? Which letter? E. Okay, and that's the granular cells right there. So it makes sense that it has to be in a part that's a blood vessel, not the tubular system of the filtrate, right? So this is in our afferent arterioles. So think about that. We got 2.5 million of these or so, right? And we got 2.5 million little places that are monitoring blood pressure all the time, right? If blood pressure drops, those cells themselves actually release renin to help us increase our blood pressure. Okay, and then we've got the part that's monitoring solute concentration. Which letter was that? A. Yeah, so we got that. And that's not monitoring solute concentration in the blood. It's monitoring solute concentration in the filtrate, right? Because that's the distal convoluted tubule. That's the part of the tubular system, not part of the blood vessels. Okay, questions on that? All right. Okay, so let's take a look here. Just when this is kind of a nice image that shows things a little bit differently. You can see the whole cortex and medulla, but then it has just kind of enlarged nephrons and enlarged blood vessels in there. So you can kind of see where everything is found. Okay, so this, yeah, you can see clearly here where the cortex is and where the medulla is. Okay. And so you can see all the things that we find in the cortex, right? So all the Bowman's capsules are up there in the cortex. Right? The proximal and distal tubules are in the cortex. The very top of the collecting ducts are in the cortex. Okay, so most of the nephron is really found up there in the cortex, right? We can see that all of that stuff right here in a cortical nephron and all that stuff right here in a juxtamedullary nephron. Okay, we can see that cortical nephron, just the tip of the loop of it sticks down in. But then with those juxtamedullary ones, look how long that loop is, right? It goes all the way to the tip of that little pyramid structure. Okay, so what's in the medulla will be most of the loop of Henle and then most of the collecting duct of those. Okay, so now I want you guys to write out this next part. We already had the gross anatomy written out, right? Starting with the major calyx, minor calyx, all that stuff down to the ureter, the bladder, urethra, all of that. But start with the microanatomy first, right? Where does it start? It has to start at Bowman's capsule, right? Glomerulus Bowman's capsule, and then make your way down kind of the whole pathway of urine all the way out to the urethra. Okay, go ahead, work on that with people on your team for a sec. That's why I come this way first, is you always got a question.
I can't picture it. It's like messing with my brain. Like,
Yeah.
why? Is it like that?
Why what?
Why
It's
is
just
the
how it
distal
is.
one there and then this looks.
Yeah, this is just, this way just is like a way to make it simpler because it actually is further away, but on this, but that's not really how it is. It's
Where
like
is
that.
this? On here? Is it not on there? Like, what is
Um,
this?
This is the collecting duct. And so the collecting duct on this one would be over here somewhere because this is poking into a collecting duct.
That's what confused me.
Yeah.
This one, where's the collecting duct in this one?
So it's these big, long, that big, long thing right there.
Oh, this.
Mhm.
Oh.
Yeah.
Isn't that the Luke Henley though?
Lupa Henley is just to the left of it.
Oh, the small
The
one?
collecting duct, yeah, it's just really small there. Collecting duct has a little thing sticking, like little branches sticking off, because that's where all the distal
Oh,
tubules
it's
connect.
this one. The one with the little spiky. part.
Yeah, the little branches kind of, yeah.
I cannot visualize what the juxtaglomerular apparatus is.
What is your question?
Can
Where?
you point to the juxtaglomerular
That's
apparatus?
this whole thing.
So the whole thing, so would that be?
So
a
it's on, it's right here.
step?
It's all of this. No, it's not a step.
Because
No.
it's like.
It's just like a, yeah, it's a group of things that all come together. Yeah. All right, guys. So let's, I'll go ahead and uncover this. And yeah, so we got Bowman's capsule. Oops, sorry. Bowman's capsule, proximal tubule, Lupa Henley, distal tubule, collecting duct. Then we go minor calyx, major calyx, renal pelvis, ureter. Let's go a little further just for fun and be bladder. All right, and then finally urethra. All right, so we're kind of starting at the micro level. All those little nephrons dump into collecting ducts, and then all those collecting ducts dump into minor calyces, major calyces, renal pelvis, ureter. All right. Lots of fun little structures inside those kidneys, huh? All right, Monday we'll talk more about what they do. Have a great weekend, guys. Yeah, it's not really the urine yet. This is where the blood is, but yeah. Come here, Betsy. Betsy.